For 43 years, I trusted my bank, until the day they turned me away when I needed them most. My wife's medication was on the line, and all they cared about was a smartphone app one didn't have. Humiliated and desperate, I thought I was out of options, until a towering stranger stepped in to remind the world that behind every policy, there's a person. This is my story, through my eyes. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. The doctor's words echoed in my ears as I left the clinic, clutching the prescription slip like a lifeline. Margaret had been through so much already, and now this. The new medication was expensive, $4.86. It felt like an impossible number, but I knew we could manage it. After all, I had saved every penny for emergencies just like this. I shuffled toward the car, my cane tapping against the pavement in a steady rhythm. Margaret needed me to be strong, to take care of things the way I always had. As I drove toward First Capital Bank, my thoughts wandered. That bank had been a constant in my life for over 43 years. I had opened an account there not long after I started coaching basketball. They knew me by name, or at least, they used to. I didn't think twice about going there for help. They'd never let me down before. The bank lobby was as pristine as ever, with its glass walls and polished floors that reflected the faint winter sunlight. I greeted the teller, a young woman who barely glanced at me before speaking. "How can I help you, sir?" I handed her the withdrawal slip and explained my situation. "I need to withdraw some money. My wife's medication, she needs it today." Her eyes flicked to her computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't process your transaction without completing the mandatory digital ID verification." I frowned, not understanding. "Digital what?" She sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "You need to verify your identity through our mobile app. It's required for all transactions." I explained patiently that I didn't have a smartphone. Margaret and I shared an old flip phone, simple, reliable, and enough for our needs until now. But my explanation didn't seem to matter. "Sir, those are the rules," she said, her tone final. I felt a wave of frustration rising. "I've been banking here for decades. My account has my name, my ID. Isn't that enough?" Her response was swift and robotic. "I'm sorry, but without digital verification, we can't access your account." I could feel the eyes of other customers on me. My voice wavered as I tried again. "Please. My wife's medication depends on this. It's urgent." The teller's lips pressed into a thin line. She waved over the security guards. "Sir, if you continue to create a disturbance, we'll have to ask you to leave." A disturbance? Was that what they thought of me? I wasn't yelling or causing a scene. I was begging, pleading, really. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. 2 guards approached, their grips firm as they guided me toward the exit. "Please," I tried again, my voice cracking. "You don't understand." But they didn't care. My cane slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor as they steered me out the door. I barely noticed the stares of the other customers or the cold air biting at my skin as I stumbled to a bench outside. My hands trembled as I tried to gather the scattered papers that had fallen from my wallet. Sitting there, humiliated and desperate, I couldn't help but wonder how the world had changed so much. I wasn't just a number. I had been loyal, honest, and hardworking my entire life. But none of that mattered now. Not to them. Margaret's health hung in the balance, and I was powerless to help her. I gripped my cane and stared at the ground, trying to hold back tears. I didn't have the luxury of giving up, not when she was depending on me. But at that moment, I had no idea what I could possibly do next. I sat there for what felt like hours, but it was only minutes. The air around me was cold, biting at my face as I tried to gather my thoughts. The bench beneath me seemed harder than usual, and my hands trembled, not just from the chill but from the frustration bubbling inside me. I clutched Margaret's prescription slip in one hand and my wallet in the other. The papers I had hastily gathered, a tattered Social Security letter, an old veteran's ID, and years of utility bills, were supposed to be enough. They should have been enough. But they weren't. How had it come to this? 43 years. I'd banked with First Capital for 43 years. Not once had I bounced a check, missed a payment, or given them a reason to doubt me. But now, because I didn't own a smartphone, I was suddenly invisible. It felt like the world was moving on without me, leaving me and Margaret behind in the dust. I replayed the scene inside the bank over and over in my mind. The teller's dismissive tone. The guard's cold hands gripping my arms. The pitying glances from strangers who didn't dare intervene. My dignity lay in pieces, scattered like the papers on the ground. I gripped my cane tightly, my knuckles white. Margaret needed me. That was the thought that kept repeating in my mind. She needed me, and I had to figure this out. But the weight of the day was pressing down on me, and for a brief moment, I let my head fall into my hands. I wasn't one to cry, but my eyes stung as I thought about the look on her face when I'd left the house. "It'll be okay, Walter," she had said, her voice soft but filled with trust. I had nodded, smiled, and promised her I'd handle everything. And now here I was, sitting on a cold bench, utterly powerless. The glass doors of the bank slid open and closed as people came and went. Each sound felt like a reminder of my failure. Some glanced at me, their faces a mix of curiosity and pity, but no one stopped. They had their own lives, their own problems. Why would they care about some old man on a bench? I looked down at the prescription slip again, the numbers blurring as tears threatened to fall. $486. That was all it would take to keep Margaret's treatment on track. But without access to our account, it might as well have been $1 million. The pharmacy closed at 5 p.m. I glanced at my watch, 4:10 p.m. Time was slipping away, and every minute felt heavier than the last. I thought about going back inside, trying again. Maybe if I explained it differently, someone would listen. But then I remembered the guard's stern voice, "Sir, if you won't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you out." My shoulders sagged. I had spent my entire life teaching young men about dignity, how to hold their heads high, even in defeat. But right now, I felt like I was losing not just the battle, but a piece of myself. Margaret didn't deserve this. She deserved a husband who could protect her, who could provide for her when it mattered most. I thought of her smile, the way she always held my hand when things got tough. She had stood by me through everything, and now, when she needed me the most, I was failing her. The wind picked up, scattering a few of the papers I'd missed. I bent down to pick them up, my joints protesting with every movement. As I straightened, I noticed a shadow fall over me, a tall, imposing shadow. "Sir, are you okay?" The voice was deep and warm, like the rumble of distant thunder. I looked up, squinting against the sun. The man standing before me was massive, towering over me like a mountain. His face was kind, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that told me he wasn't just asking to be polite. "I'm fine," I mumbled, though the crack in my voice betrayed me. I tried to brush him off, embarrassed by the whole situation. But he didn't move. "Doesn't look like it," he said, crouching slightly to meet my gaze. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Sharing my story with a stranger felt like admitting defeat all over again. But there was something about him, something steady and calm, that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, he'd understand. Taking a shaky breath, I began to explain. At first, I didn't recognize him. He crouched slightly, his sheer size making the bench I was sitting on seem like a child's toy. His presence was overwhelming, not just because of his height but because of the warmth in his eyes. His deep voice cut through the fog of my despair like a lifeline. "My name's Shaquille. You can call me Shaq," he said, extending a hand the size of a dinner plate. "You okay, coach?" The word coach caught me off guard. I hadn't been called that in years. My instinct was to wave him off, to tell him I was fine, but the truth was, I wasn't. And he seemed to already know that. "It's my wife," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "She needs her medication, and I can't get to our money." I fumbled with the prescription slip and the scattered papers in my lap, feeling the tears I'd been holding back begin to fall. "They said I need some kind of app. A smartphone. I don't even know how to use one of those." Shaq sat beside me, the bench groaning slightly under his weight. It wasn't just his size that made him larger than life, there was something about the way he listened, like every word mattered. "How much does she need?" he asked. $486, I replied. "It's not about the money, it's right there in my account. I've saved for years, for emergencies like this. But they won't let me take it out." I expected him to shake his head or offer some polite words of sympathy. Instead, he turned to the young woman who had been standing quietly behind him. His daughter, I realized. She was scrolling on her phone, her expression growing more intense by the second. "Dad," she said, holding up the screen for him to see, "it says here that the bank can use something called an emergency override protocol. They just don't want to." Shaq nodded, his face set in a determined expression. "Thank you, Mayra," he said. Then he turned back to me. "Coach, how long have you been with this bank?" 43 years, I said. "I've never missed a payment. Never bounced a check." I thought that would mean something. "It does," Shaq said firmly. He stood, and when he did, it was like the entire sidewalk shifted with him. "Let's go back in there." I froze. "I can't," I stammered. "They already kicked me out." Shaq's eyes softened. "They may have kicked you out, but they didn't kick me out. Come on, coach. Sometimes, you just need someone a little taller to help you reach the basket." I hesitated, torn between embarrassment and hope. Then Mayra spoke up, her voice filled with the kind of conviction only a teenager can muster. "You have every right to your money, Mr. Thompson. Let's go remind them of that." It was her words, and the look of quiet determination on Shaq's face, that made me stand. Together, we walked back toward the bank, the afternoon sun casting long shadows behind us. As we stepped through the glass doors, the room seemed to hush. Heads turned, and I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me. But this time, I wasn't alone. The glass doors slid shut behind us with a faint hiss, cutting off the noise of the street. Inside, the air was sterile and cool, heavy with the sound of hushed conversations and the tapping of keyboards. I felt every eye in the room turn toward us, curiosity and confusion etched on their faces. Shaq's presence was magnetic. At 7 feet tall, he seemed to fill the entire lobby, his sheer size a quiet reminder that he was not a man to be ignored. Mayra walked beside him, phone in hand, her gaze locked on the staff as if daring them to challenge us. I shuffled a step behind, clutching my cane like a lifeline. We approached the same teller who had dismissed me earlier. She froze, her polite smile faltering as her eyes darted nervously between me and Shaq. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Yes," Shaq said, his tone calm but firm. "You can help Coach Thompson access his account." Her smile stiffened. "I'm sorry, sir, but—" "Let me stop you right there," Shaq interrupted, leaning slightly over the counter. "This man has been banking with you for 43 years. He's got the paperwork. He's got the ID. And he's got a wife at home who needs her medication. So why don't you tell me why you think he doesn't deserve his own money?" The teller's cheeks flushed. She stammered something about corporate policies, but before she could finish, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" A woman in her mid-30s stepped out of a glass-walled office. She was impeccably dressed, her sharp blazer and neat bun giving her an air of authority. Her name tag read Rebecca Stevens, branch manager. "Mr. O'Neill," she said, her tone cautious but measured. "I'm Rebecca Stevens, the manager here. How can I assist you?" Shaq didn't flinch. "You can assist Coach Thompson by doing the right thing. He's been a customer here longer than you've probably been alive, and he's not leaving until he gets the money he needs." Rebecca's eyes flicked to me, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I understand your frustration, but our digital verification protocols are mandatory. They're in place to protect all our customers, including you." I felt my stomach tighten. "Protect me from what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "From my own money?" Her professional demeanor didn't waver. "These policies are designed to prevent fraud, particularly targeting seniors. Without the verification, my hands are tied." "Tied?" Shaq's voice dropped, low and deliberate. "Let me tell you what's tied. This man's wife is tied to a deadline. She needs medication. Your policies are tying his hands and putting her health at risk. Does that sound like protection to you?" Rebecca hesitated, glancing around at the growing crowd of customers who had stopped to watch. Phones were out, recording every word. I could see the tension in her shoulders as she weighed her options. "Let's step into my office," she said finally, gesturing toward the glass-walled room. In the privacy of her office, the confrontation took on a sharper edge. Rebecca sat behind her sleek desk, her fingers steepled in front of her as she tried to maintain control of the conversation. Shaq stood, his towering frame dominating the room, while I sank into a chair, my cane resting across my lap. "Mr. O'Neill, I appreciate your concern," Rebecca began, her tone clipped, "but these regulations are federal. If I make an exception..." Shaq held up a hand. "Stop. Don't give me the corporate speech. I know the law, and I know there's an override protocol for emergencies. Your own website says so." Rebecca's face paled slightly. "That protocol is for extreme cases. And this isn't extreme?" Shaq shot back. "This man's wife is waiting for medication that could save her life. What's more extreme than that?" I sat silently, my hands gripping the cane as if it might keep me from crumbling under the weight of the moment. Part of me wanted to disappear, to let Shaq fight this battle for me. But another part, the coach in me, knew I had to find my voice. "Ms. Stevens," I said, leaning forward as much as my aching joints would allow, "I've trusted this bank for more than 40 years. I've saved every penny for moments like this. I'm not asking for a favor, I'm asking for what's mine. Please." For a moment, her composure faltered. She looked at me, then at Shaq, and finally at her computer screen, where a red banner flashed, "Unverified account access restricted." I could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between policy and humanity. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Outside the glass walls, the crowd of customers pressed closer, their eyes fixed on us. The pressure was mounting, and I could see Rebecca beginning to crack. Shaq leaned in slightly, his voice softer now but no less commanding. "You have a choice," he said. "Do the right thing, or let this moment define you, and your bank. The world is watching." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Rebecca sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tapping on the polished surface as she weighed her next words. I could see it in her face, the hesitation, the calculation. She wasn't just thinking about me or even Margaret. She was thinking about her job, her reputation, the weight of the bank's policies bearing down on her shoulders. Shaq stood steady, arms crossed, his imposing frame radiating a quiet authority. I had spent years teaching young men to keep their cool under pressure, but watching him now, I realized I still had much to learn. His voice, calm and deliberate, broke the silence. "Ms. Stevens," he began, his tone measured but firm, "this isn't just about following rules. It's about doing what's right. This man, this coach, has given more to his community than you or I could measure. And now, when he needs a little help, you're telling him no because of a smartphone app?" Rebecca's eyes flicked to me briefly, then back to him. "Mr. O'Neill, I understand your perspective, but these policies are in place for a reason. Fraud prevention is critical, especially for senior accounts. Without proper digital verification, our system—" "Your system is broken," Shaq interrupted, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. "You're punishing people like Coach Thompson for being part of a generation that built this country. 43 years of loyalty, and this is how he's treated?" I wanted to say something, to thank him, but my throat felt tight. My voice wasn't steady enough to match the force of his, so I sat quietly, letting him speak for both of us. Rebecca looked down at her desk, her fingers brushing the edge of a sleek tablet. "If I bypass the system," she said, almost to herself, "it could trigger an audit. I could lose my job." "Your job?" Shaq's voice softened. "What about his wife? Her life is on the line. You're worried about losing a paycheck while this man is worried about losing the love of his life." Her gaze lifted, meeting his. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but instead, her shoulders slumped slightly. The weight of the moment was pressing down on her, and I could see it. I leaned forward, my hands gripping my cane. "Ms. Stevens," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "I've lived long enough to know that rules are important. But I also know that rules are meant to serve people, not the other way around. All I'm asking is for you to see me as a man, not just an account number." Rebecca stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a slow exhale, she reached for her tablet and tapped a few keys. The red banner on her screen disappeared. "I'll use the emergency override," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll need your signature, Mr. Thompson, to confirm this is a one-time exception." Relief washed over me, so overwhelming that I had to steady myself against the edge of the desk. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. "Thank you." As Rebecca processed the transaction, Shaq turned to me with a small smile. "You did good, Coach," he said. "Real good." I shook my head. "It wasn't me," I replied. "It was you." He chuckled softly. "Sometimes you just need someone to call the play." Rebecca handed me an envelope containing the cash, her expression a mix of professionalism and regret. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly. "And I hope your wife gets the medication she needs." I nodded, too tired and too grateful to say much more. As we left her office, the crowd in the lobby parted like water, their eyes following us. I felt their stares, but for the first time that day, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The sunlight hit me as we stepped outside, and for the first time all day, it didn't feel harsh. It felt warm, almost soothing, as if the world itself had shifted ever so slightly. Shaq walked beside me, his steps slow and deliberate, while Mayra lingered a few paces behind, her phone still in her hand. I clutched the envelope tightly, as though it might vanish if I loosened my grip. Inside was the money I'd worked my whole life to save, money I had nearly been denied. It wasn't much, but it was everything to Margaret and me. Shaq stopped suddenly, turning to face me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Before I could ask what he was doing, he stepped over to the nearby ATM, inserted his card, and punched a few buttons with practiced ease. Moments later, he turned back to me with a small stack of bills in his hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. He held the cash out to me. "Take it." I shook my head, instinctively backing away. I can't. You've already done more than enough. Shaq grinned, that easy, infectious smile that made it impossible to refuse him. Coach, consider it an investment. Not in me, not even in you, though you're worth every penny, but in the legacy you've built. The lives you've touched. The players you've coached. Take it, and don't think twice. I hesitated, my pride warring with my gratitude. Then I thought of Margaret, her smile, her resilience, her unwavering faith in me. Slowly, I reached out and took the money, my hand trembling. Thank you, I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for everything. Shaq nodded, clapping a massive hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, he said, the biggest assists happen off the court. We walked toward my car, and I felt a strange sense of clarity. The events of the day had left me drained, but there was something else, too, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Mr. Thompson, Mayra called out, jogging up beside me. Do you mind if I keep the video up? The one I posted earlier about what happened in the bank. It's kind of blowing up. Blowing up? I repeated, confused. Yeah, she said, holding up her phone. On the screen, there was a video of Shaq and me walking into the bank, our conversation with the manager, and the moment she handed me the envelope. The view count was already in the thousands. It might help other people, she added. You know, people like you who are dealing with stuff like this. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. If it helps someone, then sure. Why not? She grinned. You're going to be famous, coach. I chuckled, the sound surprising even me. I've had enough excitement for one day. When I arrived home, Margaret was waiting in her favorite chair by the window. The late afternoon light bathed her in a soft glow, and for a moment, I forgot everything but her. Her smile was faint but full of warmth. You're late, she teased gently. I walked over, placing the envelope on the table beside her. I got what we needed, I said simply. Her hand found mine, her fingers frail but steady. I never doubted you, she said. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to relax. The weight on my chest eased, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had faced humiliation, bureaucracy, and the sharp sting of being forgotten by the world I had once helped build. But I had also found kindness in unexpected places, and that had made all the difference. The next morning, Mayra's video had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, and the bank issued a public apology, promising to review its policies. People started reaching out, former players, old friends, strangers who had seen the video and wanted to share their own experiences. Margaret watched it all with quiet amusement. You've always had a way of inspiring people, Walter, she said one evening, her voice soft. You just needed a little reminder. As the days passed, I began to learn how to navigate this new world. Mayra even taught me how to use a smartphone, though I knew it would take me some time to get the hang of it. But I was willing to learn, not for me, but for Margaret. Because no system, no matter how advanced, should make someone feel as small as I had felt that day. And if my story could spark even the smallest change, then maybe everything I'd been through was worth it.